It's funny, isn't it? Like, when you think about crime, the really disturbing stuff,
Hmm.
it often comes from, well, the people you'd least expect.
Yeah, the friendly neighbor, the quiet coworker.
Right. It's unsettling. Like, those cases that stick with you, they often involve someone who seems so normal, you know?
Mhm.
And that's kind of what we're diving into today.
Absolutely. We've got a collection of those kinds of cases from the True Crime Chronicles YouTube channel, stories that just make you think.
Yeah. And our mission today is to uh, really get to the heart of 3 of those cases, you know? Like, figure out what we can learn from them.
So we're aiming for efficiency here. We know your time's valuable. We're not going to bog you down with every single detail.
Right. We're going to hit the key events, the evidence that matters, and those aspects that, well, that really get under your skin.
So let me just throw this out there. What is it about, like, everyday life that can suddenly spiral into something so dark and extreme?
Yeah. It's like, where do things go wrong? What are the signs we miss? Okay, so let's jump right into our first case. It involves a 17-year-old girl named Alexis Murphy. This happened back in August of 2013 in Shipman, Virginia. Alexis was like on her way to buy hair extensions for a photo shoot, you know, typical teenager stuff.
Yeah, and that's part of what makes it so disturbing, right? You have this seemingly ordinary situation, and then it just vanishes.
Yeah.
We know from the sources that Alexis was really close with her mom, Laura.
Right, it was supposed to be a super quick trip, 20 minutes, tops, to Lynchburg.
She leaves around 3 p.m., then there's a social media post at like 6:40, and poof, gone.
And this wasn't just like, oh, she forgot to check in. Alexis had a strict midnight curfew. Never missed it.
Responsible kid.
Totally. Plus, she was basically attached to her phone. Seriously, her family joked that it was like glued to her palm. So when she didn't come home and wasn't answering, that was a huge red flag for Laura.
And to their credit, the police actually took it seriously right away.
Which, as we know, doesn't always happen, unfortunately.
No, it doesn't. But in this case, they could tell something was definitely wrong.
Early on, they found some grainy security footage showing Alexis driving her dad's car, but you couldn't really see who was behind the wheel. They even tried to enhance it, like FBI-level stuff, but no luck.
Huh.
But get this. Her parents looked at the footage, and they were adamant. They said, that's not Alexis driving.
Wow. They must have known her habits so well.
Yeah. They knew she wouldn't have just left her dad's car somewhere random. Plus, she was apparently scared of the dark, and it was already nighttime by then. So that kind of forced the investigators to focus back on the gas station footage.
Right, where they'd seen her last.
Exactly. And there he was, this guy holding the door open for Alexis as she leaves. Seems like a normal, polite thing, right?
Sure.
But the police wanted to talk to him, just routine, you know. And they had a pretty good description because he had this very distinct Daffy Duck tattoo on his neck. Turns out it was a 48-year-old guy named Randolph Allen Taylor. He was a regular at that 24-hour gas station.
Okay, so what's his story?
Well, he initially told the cops he'd never even met Alexis and hadn't been to that specific gas station that day, although he did admit to getting gas somewhere else.
That's interesting.
Right. But here's the thing. The gas station security cameras clearly showed him with Alexis. So, you know, they confronted him with that, but he still denied it.
So he's already lying.
Yep. And then, get this. When they finally show him the footage, his story changes completely. He makes up this elaborate tale about meeting Alexis at a car dealership where he claims to have a part-time job. Says she liked the smell of his weed, so he gave her some and invited her back to his place. Even threw in a detail about her having a friend with her.
Wow, throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Right. But Alexis's mom, Laura, was like, nope, my daughter doesn't do drugs. Which, you know, who knows, right? Teenagers.
Yeah, they don't always tell their parents everything, but still, that's a pretty far-fetched story.
Totally. And the police weren't buying it either, especially when he tried to point out one of Alexis's classmates from social media as the supposed friend. But the classmate had been out of state that day, so they got a warrant to search his trailer.
And what did they find?
Some pretty incriminating stuff. They found a diamond stud earring, a fingernail, and some long black hairs. All of it later matched Alexis's DNA.
Ugh.
Yeah. And then the search dogs found her cell phone about 60 feet from his trailer. It was totally trashed, screen was smashed, battery ripped out, no way to recover anything from it.
But the fact that it was even there, I mean, we know she never went anywhere without it.
Exactly. And it gets worse. Turns out, just 45 minutes before he went to the gas station, he bought 2 adult films.
Okay, this is getting really bad.
Yeah, and then they did another, more thorough search of the trailer. They found a scrapbook full of altered nude pictures, like different faces pasted on them. And then, under the couch, They found Alexis's pink top, the one she was wearing that day. It had bloodstains on it that matched her DNA, plus her hair extensions and fake eyelashes.
Oh, my God.
So, they arrested Randolph Taylor, charged him with first-degree felony. They figured the crime was probably sexual, and get this. When they put the cuffs on him, he was apparently totally shocked, like deer in the headlights is how the source describes it.
Wow. He thought he'd gotten away with it.
Seems like it, but here's what's really chilling about this case. It turns out that back in September 2010, a 19-year-old named Samantha Clark disappeared from the same trailer park. And guess who had called her 6 times right before she vanished?
No way. Taylor again.
Yep. And they'd even had a late-night phone call. Samantha's pajamas were found on her bed, and her house key was missing. Taylor told the cops he was just calling to warn her about a married guy she was seeing, but Samantha Clark's case is still unsolved.
So he's potentially connected to 2 disappearances.
It's a disturbing thought, but, throughout all of this, Alexis's mom, Laura, never gave up hope. She even wanted to meet Taylor face-to-face, thought maybe she could appeal to him somehow. And the community was amazing. They put up billboards, even made a music video for Alexis.
That's incredible. But the trial itself must have been incredibly difficult.
Yeah, hearing all that evidence, the blood on the pink top, the hair extensions, it pretty much destroyed Laura's hope of finding Alexis alive.
Understandable. That's brutal.
They had all these witnesses at the trial, people from the gas station who'd seen Alexis and Taylor talking, the taxi driver who picked up Taylor near where Alexis's car was found. They even showed the jury the interrogation footage where he lied. But in the end, Taylor decided not to testify, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He tried to appeal, but it didn't work.
So he's basically locked up for good.
Yeah. But get this, there was actually a small group of people who protested. Can you believe that? They blamed Alexis for Taylor going to prison. They even tore down her missing person flyers.
Wow, I don't even know what to say to that.
It's messed up, right? But even with all that, they never stopped searching for Alexis's body. And then finally, in February 2021, they found her remains. It was about 5 miles from where she was last seen. It turns out they'd actually found her in December 2020, but it took a while to identify her.
Oh, wow. So what happened? Did they get a new lead or something?
Taylor finally confessed. He told them he'd strangled her and showed them exactly where her body was. It was awful, but at least her family was finally able to bring her home.
Some closure, at least.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to our second case. This one takes us back to 1993 in Innisfail, Queensland, Australia. It's about a 17-year-old named Gabriel Meyer. Everyone called him Gabe. He disappeared after working out with his friend, Damon Kolanga.
Okay, so what was Gabe like?
Well, the sources paint him as like this amazing kid. Enterprising, active, athletic, mature for his age, responsible, reliable. Everybody loved him. His family had actually moved to Innisfail from Miami to get away from the crime there.
So they thought they were moving to a safer place.
Exactly. They were a close family, which makes this whole thing even more tragic.
Right, because you'd think if he ran away or something, they'd have some idea why.
Exactly. The last anyone saw Gabe, he was at Damon's apartment after the gym. Gabe had mentioned wanting to go for a swim in the Johnston River late at night, and his dad, Doug, thought that was super weird.
Why would he want to swim in a river full of crocodiles at night?
Right, totally out of character. So when Gabe didn't come home, Doug immediately started searching, then filed a police report. Of course, everyone thought maybe he'd run away, but he had no reason to, and his bank account hadn't been touched.
So running away seems unlikely. What about an accident? Like maybe he drowned or something?
His parents didn't buy that for a second. Gabe was a strong swimmer, and he knew how dangerous that river was.
Okay, so what did the police think happened?
Well, they started looking at Damon Kolanga pretty closely. I mean, he was the last one to see Gabe alive. And it turns out Damon had been arrested a few years earlier, back in 1991, for trying to kill his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend.
Whoa, hold on. He actually tried to kill someone.
Yeah, he was originally charged with attempted murder, but it got downgraded. He ended up doing community service.
Okay, so this Damon guy has a violent past.
Yeah, and that obviously raised some red flags.
What did he say happened to Gabe?
He said that Gabe left his apartment around 5:30 to go swimming right after having a protein shake. Damon's roommates backed up his story.
So he had an alibi.
Yeah, at least on paper. But Gabe's family wasn't giving up. They did a public appeal for information, anything that might help.
And did they get any leads?
Actually, yeah. A teenage girl came forward. She said she and her boyfriend were by the Johnston River that night around 7:34, and they saw Gabe's gym bag, his shoes, and some other stuff just sitting on the pontoon.
So someone had dumped his belongings by the river.
Yeah, they thought it was a prank, so they threw everything in the water.
Yeah.
Later, when they heard about Gabe missing, they realized what they'd done and went to the police.
That's rough. I mean, not knowing they were messing with the missing person stuff.
Totally. So the police went and searched the river. They even used explosives to scare away the crocs. And they found Gabe's watch, his shoes, and the gym bag.
But if his stuff was by the river, why didn't they find his body there?
That's what got the investigators thinking. They knew Gabe had this diver's watch with, like, a double clasp. It wouldn't have just fallen off.
So maybe someone took it off him.
Exactly. They started digging deeper, and it turns out Damon was obsessed with Gabe's older sister, Fawn.
Wait, hold on. The guy who was last seen with Gabe was obsessed with his sister?
Yep. They dated briefly, like 3 weeks, but Fawn had moved to the U.S. for college. Damon was crushed when she left, even though the Meyers were still trying to be supportive.
That's awkward.
Yeah. And get this. Fawn called Damon right before Gabe disappeared and basically told him it was over. The cops thought maybe Damon snapped, like he wanted to get revenge or force Fawn to come back.
Okay, but what about his alibi? Didn't he say he was in Tully that night?
Yeah, he said he drove there to give his sister a rug, but the rug was all dirty and ripped like it had been lying around outside. Plus, the rental car he used had way more mileage on it than it should have if he just went to Tully and back.
So his alibi was falling apart.
Pretty much. And like I said, there was no sign of a struggle at his apartment. But then a guy named James Potter came forward and told the cops about Damon digging these weird cross-shaped holes in Polly Creek.
Cross-shaped? That's creepy.
Right. And this was just a couple of weeks before Gabe vanished. The holes were covered up with palm leaves, and Damon claimed he was going to grow weed there, but...
The timing's suspicious.
Totally. And Fawn tried calling Damon to see if he'd tell her anything, but he wouldn't talk.
Man, this is messed up.
Yeah. And then, 2 weeks after Gabe disappeared, a woman who lived near Damon's parents' farm called the cops. She said there was this awful smell coming from the property.
Oh, no.
They went to check it out, and they found Gabe's body. It was wrapped in a blanket, tied up with rope, and hidden under leaves and branches.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah. And another witness came forward who'd seen Damon's car near the farm that night. And a few days later, he saw Damon riding a bike over there like he was checking on the body.
So, he definitely has something to do with it. But how did Gabe die?
That's the weird part. The autopsy didn't show any obvious injuries, no signs of strangulation or anything, but they did find a lethal dose of over-the-counter cold and flu meds in his system.
So he was poisoned.
Looks like it. And guess what? The pharmacist confirmed that Damon bought that exact medication the day after Fawn dumped him on the phone.
Whoa.
Yeah, and Damon's ex-wife recognized the blanket they found Gabe wrapped in. And his roommate said a length of rope, just like the one they used to tie Gabe up, went missing from their place after he disappeared. Oh, and get this, they even found fibers on the blanket that matched the carpet in Damon's garage.
So they think he transported the body in the rolled-up carpet.
Exactly, it was all starting to add up. Damon's own sister, Deborah, begged him to confess. And he finally admitted to her that he did it, but he claimed it was an accident. Said Gabe attacked him first, and he just snapped.
But he never told that to the police.
Nope. And none of it really added up with all the evidence, the pharmacy receipt, those holes in Polly Creek, the rug, the car mileage.
So what did the prosecution think happened?
They figured he lured Gabe back to his apartment, spiked his protein shake with those meds, and then probably suffocated him with a plastic bag. Then he tied him up, wrapped him in the blanket and carpet, dumped his stuff by the river to make it look like an accident, and buried him near his parents' place.
Man, that's cold.
Yeah. So they convicted Damon of murder. He was sentenced to life, but he could get parole after 13 years.
Only 13 years for murder.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? The Meyers fought like hell to keep him locked up, but eventually he got parole.
I bet that was devastating for them.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so our last case for today brings us to Anaheim, California, December 2011, Christmas morning.
Christmas morning?
Yeah. Kids are opening presents. And their mom, Giselle Preston, is just sitting there, not moving. Dead.
God.
That's awful.
Yeah, it's worse. See, earlier that month, the paramedics got called to their apartment. They were told a young woman had fallen and hit her head after drinking too much.
Okay.
But when they got there, the whole apartment was covered in blood. Like, way more than you'd expect from a fall.
So something else happened.
Yeah. Turns out the woman, Giselle, she was 26, and she was already dead when they arrived.
Jeez. So who was she?
Her nickname was Zazie. She was born in Anaheim, one of 5 kids, raised by her mom and grandma. She loved art, singing, dancing, just a really creative person. But she had this really messed up relationship with this guy named William Wallace.
Okay.
Back in 2008, she called the cops on him for domestic violence. He ran, but she called again and they arrested him. He did 19 days for a domestic violence offense.
So red flags from the start. Big time. Zell tried to get a restraining order, but he weaseled his way back into her life. He'd been arrested again for drugs this time and did almost 2 years. When he got out, he claimed he'd found God and convinced Zell to take him back.
So she gave him another chance?
Yeah. At first, she was posting all happy stuff on social media. But then her posts started changing. She was getting frustrated with his disrespect, the cheating, the violence. She even started posting things like, "Find your own man, ladies."
Sounds like she was trying to warn other women.
Yeah. I mean, William kept getting arrested for drugs, domestic violence, fighting. He kept coming back to Zell, even though she had a restraining order against him. And she kept taking him back every time he apologized or threatened her. It's just classic cycle of abuse.
It's tragic. So what happened next?
Well, she got pregnant in 2011. She was hoping that would change things, you know.
A fresh start.
Right. But he just got worse. There were times she had to hide from him and even ended up in the hospital because of his beatings.
Oh, my God.
They actually got married in November 2011. Her family was totally against it, but she thought maybe it would help. But guess what? On their wedding night, he beat her so badly that she went into premature labor.
No, on their wedding night.
Yeah, she gave birth to their son, and things were kind of okay for a bit, but then at Thanksgiving dinner, something happened that just foreshadowed everything.
What happened?
I don't know the specifics, but it just made it clear that William wasn't going to change. Zell had been studying to be a domestic violence counselor, and after that Thanksgiving incident, she decided she'd had enough.
So she was going to leave him.
Yeah, she was going to wait until she finished her course, though.
Wow. She was literally going to help other women in the exact situation she was in.
I know, right? It's crazy. So on December 9th, he went ballistic because Zell and her daughters were taking too long to get ready. Her grandma actually took them to a mall to keep them safe, but William followed them there and convinced Zell to come home.
Oh, man. She needed to get away from him.
Yeah, and a few days later, she was Christmas shopping at the mall with her grandma, and she confided in her. She was terrified of William and said she was planning to leave for good after she graduated. But then Christmas Eve happened.
What happened on Christmas Eve?
They went to a party at their neighbor's place, and they got into a fight about leaving the kids alone. They went home around midnight, both in a bad mood. Then they started arguing again, and it turned physical. Zell's 8-year-old daughter woke up and saw the whole thing.
Oh, God, that poor kid.
Yeah, it's awful. William was beating Zell, and she was trying to protect her daughter. She ended up falling and hitting her head on the toilet. The daughter even tried to help her pick up the broken glass. But
she didn't make it.
No. But before she died, she made sure all the kids' Christmas presents were laid out.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. So the next morning, William calls 911, all panicked, saying Zell had fallen and hit her head while she was drunk. But the paramedics got there, and they knew immediately that something was wrong. There was blood everywhere, and they could tell she died from, massive trauma, not a fall.
So what did the autopsy say?
It showed she had injuries all over her body. The cause of death was a brain hemorrhage from blunt force trauma.
So he beat her to death.
Pretty much.
Right.
But it took 9 years to get him to trial. Part of the delay was because of racial disparities in the pretrial detention system, and part of it was because they had to wait for Zell's daughter to be old enough to testify.
It must have been so difficult for her.
Yeah, it was. But she was so brave. Her testimony at the trial back in March 2021 was incredibly powerful. She described everything she saw that night, and it matched all the forensic evidence.
So did they convict him of murder?
No, they got him on involuntary manslaughter and domestic violence. He was sentenced to 15 years.
Only 15 years.
Yeah, and he got credit for time served, so he could be out as early as 2027. Zell's grandmother said it best. William had been draining Zell's life long before he actually killed her.
It's just so sad.
It is. The source mentioned that one of Zell's professors actually shares her story with his students as a warning about domestic violence. And thankfully, her 3 kids are being raised by her mom now, so they're safe and loved.
That's good to hear, at least.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff, right?
It is. Thinking about these 3 cases, it's just chilling. you know?
Yeah.
They all happen in different ways, but they all have these common threads that are just unsettling.
Right. Like how these seemingly normal people can turn out to be so dangerous and how control and abuse can be so insidious, especially in relationships. And then you have the families of the victims.
Yeah?
They're left to deal with the trauma, sometimes for years and years.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, how often do we miss those early warning signs? What can we do to stop this from happening?
Yeah, that's a question we all need to be asking ourselves.
It really is. These cases are like a wake-up call. We need to be more aware, recognize the red flags, trust our gut. And if we see something, say something, whether it's for ourselves or for someone we care about.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We know it was heavy, but hopefully it gave you some things to think about.
Absolutely. And maybe even inspire some action. Because even one life saved is a victory.
That's a great point. Well, until next time, stay safe, everyone.
And stay aware.